I really don't think I have to say anything about the rapture. But he does. And he's the only one I trust on TikTok.
The story of how the rapture was invented and became a popular view amongst evangelical Christians is fascinating. Let me tell you that, and how they stick it into the book of Revelation. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. The first thing you need to know is that the rapture is different from the second coming. The rapture is part of this biblical interpretation scheme that was invented, and it is a secret spiriting away of Christians before something that interpretive scheme calls the tribulation period. The second coming is part of basically every theological tradition in Christianity, including this interpretive scheme, and it is the return of Jesus to the earth. The story starts with a guy named John Nelson Darby in the 1830s. He was an Anglican priest who felt like there was corruption and compromise in the church, and he left and formed a reform movement called the Plymouth Brethren. And then he had this idea that would change everything. The idea that he came up with was a dividing of history into different dispensations where God dealt with humanity in different ways. Like, one of the dispensations was the period of the law. The one that we're in right now is the church age, and there are dispensations to come. This way of looking at history gave him a new way of interpreting biblical prophecy. Each of those dispensations was a sort of divine experiment in dealing with humanity. And it means also that the Christian church was not an evolution of Israel. You couldn't say that Israel and the Christian church were the same thing. So he began to go back through the Bible and invent ways of fitting the biblical text into his interpretive scheme. When he came to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where it uses the phrase, caught up into the clouds to meet the Lord, he came to the conclusion that God would remove the church before basically chaos began. This was a brand new idea that he began preaching all across the British Isles. And then it crossed the Atlantic and came to the United States at the exact right time. It entered America during the post-Civil War period, where there was massive social upheaval, rapid industrialization, and a sense that the world was spinning out of control. And so a theological idea that promised escape from chaos resonated, and then was picked up by a really influential preacher. That preacher was Cyrus Ingerson Schofield. He was a lawyer turned Texas preacher that was one of Darby's most devoted disciples, and actually put dispensationalism into the Bible. In 1909, he released the Schofield Reference Bible, where he put footnotes throughout the biblical text that indicated that the ideas that were invented by Schofield were the one correct interpretation of these different passages. This had a massive impact because it was spoken with certainty, and it was the first time many people ever encountered these things and ever really encountered a reference Bible. So the publication of this Bible is what is responsible from moving these ideas invented by John Darby from theories about the Bible into what people were considering an orthodox belief system, or really the orthodox belief system. This Bible was massively popular by the 1920s and 1930s and was being used in seminaries and Sunday schools and by revivalist preachers. Then 1970 happens when Hal Lindsey releases a book called The Late Great Planet Earth, where he takes all of these biblical ideas and connects them to current events, showing how current events like the Cold War were fulfilling this dispensational, prophetic, biblical interpretation scheme. And then, of course, the fictional series Left Behind and the movies took that way into the mainstream, and it was completely solidified. Now, what about the book of Revelation? People often ask, how is this connected to that book? And this dispensational system sees a disappearance of the church between Revelation chapter 3 and chapter 4, and Darby says that this disappearance of the church is because of a trumpet that is sounded, and this words come up here. And he says that is the rapture in the book of Revelation. So it's interesting, when you see conversations online about all of this, oftentimes they are playing on this dispensational field. They're sort of assuming that all of this way of interpreting biblical prophecy is talking about the future and, you know, the American president or whatever is obviously the right one. Because, you know, popular ideas are difficult to dislodge. But the thing is that biblical scholars, the people who know the most about how to understand the Bible, say that this is a completely invalid scheme. I mean, it was invented by a guy in the 1830s. And they say that every one of these passages has a very clear meaning that has nothing to do with the rapture. So there you have it. That's the story, how one random guy's idea becomes the popular view, even though it's just not true. The story of how the rapture was invented and became a popular view amongst evangelical Christians is fascinating. Let me tell you that.